Welcome to the Covert Narcissism Podcast. I'm your host, Renee Swanson. I am not a therapist, and you are not a victim. Triangulation is what happens when communication that should go in a straight line suddenly has corners. When messages get twisted, when help becomes control, when you realize that the people you love are being used against you, one whispered sentence at a time. Welcome back to the Covert Narcissism Podcast, where we stop pretending manipulation is love and start calling it what it is. Today we're talking about triangulation, one of the covert narcissist's most subtle and painful tactics. Now let's start with the story. From the outside, the Wallace family looked peaceful. Dinner together most nights, family photos at Christmas, a few small arguments here and there, but nothing serious. Inside the house, conversations, though, didn't move in straight lines. They moved in triangles. So Caroline and David had been married 18 years. They had two kids, Ethan, 17, and Lily, 14. Caroline carried most of the emotional labor for the family, and David was the calm, quiet, logical, and always the voice of reason. The problem was his version of reason was whatever kept him in control. Every disagreement between David and Caroline seemed to just ripple through the house. If Caroline got upset about something, somehow by dinner, everyone else seemed irritated too. But no one could really say why. That's the thing about covert triangulation. It's invisible until it's everywhere. It started small. Behind the closed bedroom door, David voiced his frustration and even anger about Ethan not being responsible with his schoolwork. And to avoid a major blow-up aimed at Ethan, Caroline stepped in to try to help the situation. But when Caroline fussed at Ethan for forgetting his homework, David quietly told him later, "Don't take it personally, buddy. Your mom's just been really stressed lately." Again, behind closed doors, David was mad that the house was a mess and told Caroline that she needs to be harder on Lily about the household chores. "If you weren't such a softie, then our kids would learn some responsibility around here." But when Caroline later speaks up to Lily about not helping around the house and voices her frustration, he tells Lily later, "Your mom's just tired. You know how she gets when things aren't perfect. It's okay." He said it softly, even kindly. But those words plant seeds. Now the kids see their mom as unpredictable, emotional, and their dad as supportive and understanding. Caroline did not know that these conversations were taking place, but she saw her kids pulling away, their eyes rolling, their patience thinning. She couldn't understand why her family seemed irritated with her all the time. But behind closed doors, David was rewriting the story on both sides and controlling the narrative. He was pulling the puppet strings and watching everyone dance around him. To Caroline, he was firm and ugly, complaining that the kids weren't good enough because of her lack of parenting. But to the kids, Caroline was the problem for being too harsh, while he was the calm and reasonable interpreter. Eventually, Caroline tried to clear the air. She sat everyone down one night and said, "Hey, if something's bothering you, let's talk about it." Ethan crossed his arms. "You're always upset, Mom. We never know what version of you we're going to get." Her voice trembled. "What? Where is this coming from?" And he shrugged and said, "Dad said you've been overwhelmed again. He told us to give you space." Caroline turns to David, her heart pounding. And there he was, calm, steady, sighing just enough to look patient. "I was just trying to help, Caroline. You've seemed on edge, and I didn't want the kids to take it personally." And just like that, her eyes opened to the triangulation. Her attempt to help, to connect with the kids, to be a good parent, to understand with him and listen to his words and his complaints, all of those attempts from her became proof of her instability. They were used against her. She was emotional and upset while he was calm. And the kids were sympathetic to him. That's the cruelty of triangulation. It turns truth into performance and love into suspicion, all while the covert narcissist sits back and looks like the peacekeeper. It took years before Caroline could see what was happening. When talking to her, the kids were never good enough in David's eyes, and he placed the responsibility solely on her. To the kids, he was patient and understanding, and undermining any of her attempts to show up as a parent. She eventually did realize in her home that everything she said went through a filter first, his filter. If she was frustrated, it was labeled as irrational. If she was sad, it was moody. If she was firm, it was harsh. Nothing was ever taken the way she meant it. Nothing was ever heard in her voice. That's how covert triangulation works. It rewrites the story one quiet conversation at a time until even the people you love most cannot see you clearly anymore. Let's go to story number 2. If you had met the Pierce family at church, you would think they were perfect. 2 teenage daughters, Hannah and Claire. They were bright, polite, and inseparable. And their mother, Diane, who everyone described as so kind and so devoted to her girls. But behind that soft-spoken exterior, Diane was orchestrating her family like a puppet show, quietly turning her daughters toward her and away from each other, depending on who was serving her emotional needs that day, of course. Hannah was the achiever, top grades, reliable and steady. Claire was creative, spontaneous, artistic, and free-spirited. Well, Diane loved to highlight their differences. My girls are total opposites. Hannah's my steady rock. Claire's my wild heart. But beneath those sweet labels, or seemingly sweet labels, was a setup. A good girl and a problem child. A logical one and a dramatic one. And every conversation Diane had with them reinforced those roles. When Claire got a leading role in the school play, Diane told Hannah that night, "Your sister just loves the attention. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight like she does." But when Hannah got an award for academic excellence, Diane whispered to Claire, "It must be nice to have everything come so easily for your sister." Neither daughter knew what was being said to the other. They just started feeling uneasy around each other, defensive, jealous, misunderstood. Little by little, they stopped confiding in each other, and instead they started competing. And Diane? She just stayed right in the middle of it, comforting each one for the pain she herself was causing. By the time they were adults, their relationship was extremely strained. Claire thought that Hannah judged her. Hannah thought that Claire resented her. Every conversation had an edge. Years of quiet misunderstanding sat between them like ghosts. At their father's funeral, sitting side by side for the first time in months, the truth began to surface. Claire whispered, "I always thought Mom blamed me for everything growing up." Hannah looked shocked. "What?" "She told me that I was too hard on you." And suddenly it all clicked. All those years of confusion, competition, and silence, they weren't about them at all. They were about her. Diane had pitted them against each other so perfectly that they never even realized they were fighting the wrong battle. They were never enemies. They were co-victims in the same system of control. This is a deep pain of covert narcissistic parenting. Triangulation between siblings doesn't always look like open rivalry. Sometimes it's subtle, whispered comparisons, misquoted compliments, half-truths shared with a sweet smile. The covert narcissistic parent thrives in that subtlety. They control the family narrative without ever raising their voice. They divide just enough to keep loyalty flowing toward themselves. And the siblings, who should have been each other's safest allies, they grew up doubting, resenting, and misunderstanding each other. This is a misdirected anger, a misdirected misunderstanding. Because when a narcissistic parent controls communication, they also control connection. And it's not until the kids start talking to each other directly that they finally realize how much of their conflict was not theirs at all. One of the hardest truths that survivors of covert narcissism face is when you realize that the person you spent years resenting was never the real problem. You don't just lose trust in this covert narcissist in your life, you actually lose years of connection with your other family members, too. When a covert narcissist triangulates their family, they don't just create tension, they reshape reality. They decide who's the sensitive one, who's the favorite, and who's the problem, and everyone else starts living inside that script. It's a quiet, invisible war, one fought through glances, half truths, and subtle comparisons. No one ever sees the hand that's pulling the strings. It keeps everyone orbiting around one person, the covert narcissist. Because as long as you're competing for their approval, you'll never notice who's actually pulling the strings. And the cruelest part? The narcissist usually loves playing the hero between the people, the very people that they're causing the problem with. They become the peacekeeper, the one who just wants everyone to get along. They say things like, "Why do you two always fight? I've done everything I can to help you or to treat you equally." But when the fog lifts, when the family members finally start talking directly to each other, when the siblings, the children of the covert narcissistic parent, when they move into adulthood and they finally start talking directly to each other, the clarity returns. And that clarity can feel like grief, but it can feel like relief all at the same time. Because you realize how much connection was stolen, how much love was filtered, how much peace was kept just out of reach, all to protect this one person's fragile ego. But you also then learn to communicate directly, to stop playing roles that were never yours to play, and to rebuild trust, one honest conversation at a time. Healing from this kind of triangulation means facing two painful truths at once. The person who was supposed to protect your bond used it to meet their own emotional needs. The sibling or other family member that you saw as your enemy was caught in the same trap as you. When survivors of these family systems finally start talking directly to each other, not through the parent, not through the old stories, but heart to heart right now, it's like lifting a fog that's been there since childhood. And you begin to realize, oh, you were just trying to survive too. And that moment of clarity, is one of the most powerful steps in generational healing. Because the truth doesn't just set you free, it starts freeing everyone else who was trapped in that same pattern of confusion and comparison. You don't have to keep the competition alive. You can step out of the triangle. You can rewrite the family story, one honest, direct healing conversation at a time. Triangulation doesn't always sound like manipulation. Sometimes it sounds like concern or like empathy or like they're just trying to help. But underneath, it's about control. And control comes at the cost of connection. Triangulation erodes trust between people who should have been allies. It turns love into confusion and leaves you constantly questioning your tone, your memory, and your worth. It's one of the most painful parts of covert narcissistic abuse because it distorts what's most sacred, the relationship that should have been safe. But the good news is once you see it, then you can start to unsee the triangle. You can stop feeding the triangle. You can stop seeing competition where there wasn't competition. You can stop seeing issues between you and this other family member where there weren't issues. You can start reconnecting with your truth with the people who were never actually against you. If this episode hit home with you, I invite you to join me next week. We're going to talk about how to step out of triangulation and begin repairing the very relationships that it damaged. Because healing isn't just about breaking free from the narcissist control. It's also about rebuilding the connections that were destroyed by this confusion. It starts with honesty, compassion, and clarity. And if you were caught in a system designed to confuse you, the more you see it, the freer you and those you love will become. I look forward to talking to you next week on tools for breaking out of this triangle and starting to heal with your other family members. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. You have been listening to the Covert Narcissism podcast, where we break apart the insidious nature of these incredibly destructive and infinitely frustrating individuals. If you are caught up in this crazy making relationship and drowning in self doubt, guilt, or rumination, please reach out to me anytime. I offer individualized live coaching in both group and individual settings. We can find the right program for you. You do not need to go through this alone. You can find all of that information on my website at covertnarcissism.com. You can also reach out to me by email at Renee, Renee, at covertnarcissism.com. I do look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Remember, I am not a therapist, and you are not a victim. I am a coach, and you are a survivor. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those that she has worked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support an allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and the information provided. Thank you.